Yo guys, what is up? Max here in Diablo 4 video, and today we're going over all of the most important changes to the Druid class in the most recent balance patch that should be coming out in a few days when Season 2 launches. Now, there are so many changes and class balance things that are happening in this patch that's just too much to cover for all the classes in one video, and I've got a lot of things I want to talk about with the Druid and my opinions on it and what I think is going to be really good and what I wouldn't recommend using anymore. And so I wanted to make this video just specifically focused on the Druid. I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get right into it. So the very first thing to talk about is the new Druid unique, the Dolmen Stone. Now, we actually got to see some gameplay footage of this, and it's a new unique amulet that allows you, whenever you cast Boulder while your Hurricane is active, it will cause your boulders to rotate around you, and then you can get close to enemies, and your boulders will hit enemies multiple times, rotating around you. Think kind of Whirlwind for Barbarian, but as a Druid thing, or Ball Lightning for Sork, where it rotates the ball of lightnings around you for the Druid. Now, this seems really cool. I'm really glad that they're adding an item like this because it genuinely adds new functionality to the skills rather than just like, oh, this skill does a bit more damage or this skill is active a bit more. It's like a brand new skill interaction. So really cool item. Whether or not it's going to actually be good at endgame, I just don't know right now. The big issue is Boulder has a cooldown unless you put on the aspect that makes it a core skill. And once it's a core skill, it costs 50 mana to cast. So you really need to or 50 spirit. You really need to have a lot of spirit generation. I'm planning on using this as a Nature's Fury build where I would use Shred and shred towards enemies while Hurricane is active, and then I would cast the boulders around me as additional damage and mainly focus on the boulder damage, and then use Shred as a vehicle to get around, kind of like I did with Shred Explosion, but this time with the boulders doing my damage and the Hurricane rotating around me. Could be a really, really fun build. So that's kind of my plan for the Dolmen Stone. The other unique here that's really interesting is the X-Files Corroded Signet, which allows your dot damage over time effects to have a chance to explode or erupt, dealing damage to nearby enemies. Druid's really great at spreading poison to a bunch of enemies already, and then having a chance for that poison damage to explode could be really awesome visually and could be pretty strong. And so for a poison build for Druid, this could be a ton of fun. Our new aspect for the season, think of this last season we got the Poison Creeper cast Landslide. This is the new season for Druid, and it's the Raw Might aspect. After you hit 15 enemies with your Werebear skills, your next Werebear skill will deal 30 to 50% multiplicative damage, more damage, and stun enemies for 2 seconds. Now, this is massive. One, because it's a massive multiplier for your Werebear skills, and with the changes to the damage formula, they're basically removing a lot of the multiplicative damage increases that you could get and changing them to aspects, uniques, and your Paragon board. So all you need to do is hit 15 cumulative enemies, not 15 enemies with one cast. Then you'll be able to get this massive damage increase. You put this on a two-hander. Now you've got a Werebear skill that's going to hit for 100% increased damage, which should be really, really cool. I think Overpower Werebear is also going to be the strongest it's been in this season, as the changes to Overpower all look pretty good. And that is it for our actual legendary aspects. Now we get to the Paragon glyphs. Now we've got 2 new glyphs for the Druid, both of which I'm quite excited for. Mainly this Electrocution node. For every 5 willpower purchased within range, your Lightning Bolts and Dancing Bolts deal up to 39% increased damage. This is a massive damage increase for those Lightning Bolts and Dancing Bolts, which are a big part of the damage of Lightning builds. And then you get another multiplier for enemies damaged by your Lightning Bolts or Dancing Bolts take 20% increased damage from you for 5 seconds. For any Lightning build, this is going to be a new must-have aspect. And then when you pair that with the aspect that gives you just a straight up damage increase with your lightning damage, these two are going to synergize really well, and I think the lightning builds are going to have another very good season here. Tectonic, for every 5 dexterity purchases within range, your earth skills gain increased crit damage, and the additional bonus is you get lucky hit chance. Lucky hit chance is much more valuable here. Crit strike damage is no longer multiplicative with the new changes to the damage formula. Getting increased crit damage is basically the same as getting increased damage to close enemies or increased earth skill damage. It's just all additive. So not the greatest bonus here, but the lucky hit chance is very nice. These are the overpower changes that I was mentioning. Overpower damage will now deal 50% multiplicative damage increase based on your current life percentage, and then you get additive plus 2% damage per 1% of your base life that you have in Fortify, and then additive 2% damage per 1% of your base life that you have in bonus life above your base health. And all overpowered damage affixes have been increased by 50%. Overpowered damage Paragon glyphs have been increased by 33%, and overpowered damage Paragon nodes have been increased by 50%. As well as overpower should now probably be working with vulnerable. In my, from my understanding, overpower did not get benefits from an enemy being vulnerable. It now should, and it's getting buffed. So overpower damage is going to be hitting really hard if you want to try an overpower werebear build. Now is going to be a really great season to try that. And then we get into the actual druid specific balance changes. So to start, we've got the Mad Wolf's Glee. They're increasing the poison damage affix on it by 140%. That's not like it's getting plus 140%. It's 140% multiplicative. So it's like 1.4 more percentage of what it was before. Not if it was like 10, it's now going to be 150. Just clarifying there. Then we've got the Insatiable Fury. Overpowered damage affix increased by double. Total armor while in werebear form affix increased by 180%. Armor is going to be less valuable than before because it is only affecting your physical damage resistances, and resistances are now going to be blocking our elemental damage that we take. So they're buffing up all of the armor values to compensate for this change. So we're going to be getting a lot more armor, which is going to be quite nice. They changed the Storm Companions to give you companion skill damage affixes and increase the ranks of wolf affix. I think this will be okay. I still don't plan on playing Druid Companions, to be honest. Flesh Render got a really nice change. This is the new unique that when you did a Blood Howl or a Debilitating Roar, you would explode the poison damage on enemies. The big issue with that is it wasn't really scaling very well, and now they added a scaler for it, so now it's increased by 10% for every 100 willpower that you have. That's a very, very nice change there. Hunter's Zenith Ring, they've replaced with Crit Strike Chance. Crit Strike Chance is now way more important than Crit Strike damage, because Crit Strike damage is now effectively the same as like damage to close enemies. However, it's still multiplicative when you initially crit. So Crit Strike Chance is very, very valuable, and getting more Crit Strike Chance is super important for builds, but Crit Strike damage is not as important, because you're going to get your base multiplicative crit damage without having to equip any more increases to crit damage. But some nice things: Quick Shift passive affix increased by 200%, and overpowered damage with bear skills replaced with bonus ranks of the Heightened Sense passive. So now you're going to have a ring with basically 2 passive slots, which is really cool for the Hunter Zenith. Then we've got Fierce Earth Spike. They're changing Fortify to Fortify off of your max life rather than your base life. What this means is before, if you were generating Fortify, it was only going off of your base life, and now it's going to go off your max life. So builds that were generating Fortify before are going to have a much easier time generating Fortify and staying fortified. So any build that was using Fortify before, this is a big increase and buff to it. They buffed Raven's active damage by a fair bit, and the bonus crit strike chance. Once again, bonus crit strike chance is now very valuable. However, I just still don't really plan on using companions, to be honest. Rabies, they gave a pretty sizable buff. Damage increase from 1.1 to 1.4. This is on top of all the other buffs that Rabies has gotten. And they gave it a base spread increase by 50%, but reduced the node that increased its spread. This basically means that you can or cannot take this, but the like dot explosions with Rabies could be really, really neat. Basically more damage for Rabies, but the actual spread, if you take this node, isn't increased because they're shifting around these spread amounts. Then we've got Preserving Earth and Bulwark. Fortify off max life. Everything of this is Fortify off your max life. They reduced the knockback distance of Trample by 10%. If you played Trample before, you know why this is a good change. Sometimes you knock enemies away from your damage, and it can be quite frustrating. Passives, they gave Ancestral Fortitude resistance to all elements because that's even more important. Charged Atmosphere, we're now going to summon these lightning bolts more often. Didn't think these were all that good anyways, so not super important there. This is a good change, though. Your chance to immobilize is increased by up to 24%, and your bonus damage is increased. These skill nodes are going to be even more important for generating more damage because of the changes to the damage formula, meaning that crit and vulnerable are no longer multiplicative. So real nice change there. Safeguard, Fortify, 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 Fortify. Here's a massive one, and I want to take some time to explain this because I know I've been kind of rushing through this. So Nature's Fury, casting an Earth skill has a 30% chance to trigger a free Storm skill of that same category and vice versa. These free skills count as both Earth and Storm skills. Now, this is a massive change and a massive buff to Nature's Fury. What this means is on my, like, for example, Terravolt build, where you would use the Lightning Storm to summon landslides. That was a build where I found that the single target of Lightning Storm was lacking, and so I would use landslides to make up for that single target, but then you'd run into the issue of having to scale both Earth damage and Storm damage to really get the most out of both skills, and you were having to deal with split scaling, which just made it not as optimal. Now, if in, for example, that build, my landslides that are being cast from my Lightning Storm, from my lightning abilities, my Storm abilities, those landslides will count as Storm skills, meaning I don't need to scale Earth damage at all if I don't want to. I can full send Storm and scale the landslide damage with Storm damage, or I can still get Earth and double scale. For example, if I had a 50% increase to Storm skills and a 50% increase to Earth skills, those would now double apply or double dip for landslide. This is a huge buff for Nature Fury skills and Nature Fury builds, and could possibly make things that we're using it even stronger. Looking at you, like our Poison Creeper Landslide Druid, Terravolt might be absolutely nutty in addition to all the changes with Lightning Bolts. So really looking forward to testing that. Ursine Strength, they buffed this. This is really like your capstone passive. It was, while healthy, you deal more damage. Now you deal multiplicative damage increase and another multiplicative damage increase if you overpower enemies. Once again, overpower is going to be sitting real pretty. And they buffed Lupine Ferocity. It used to be you'd get a guaranteed crit, and that guaranteed crit would deal like 70% crit damage, which isn't as important. So they're buffing it up. And now if you get that guaranteed crit and it hits an injured enemy, you get 140% more crit damage on top of that 70%. So massive hit for, or massive buff to Lupine Ferocity. Then we get our legendary aspects. Aspect of the Raid-Paging Werebeast. This was the aspect that would give you uncapped crit damage, basically. It was when you crit while in your Werebeast, you would get 10% crit damage, and it would stack basically to 1,000% crit damage, or basically uncapped. It was very, very gross. Now with the changes to crit strike damage, getting increases to crit strike damage is basically the same as getting increases to close damage or increases with like lightning skills. It's all functionally additive and the same. So this is a big nerf, but it's not as big as a nerf as it looks, because the real big nerf is the change to the multiplicative. Obviously, like Tempest Roar Storm builds are going to be seeing way smaller numbers than they were before, but they also nerfed enemies, so we'll see how this balances out. I'm still expecting like Tornado to be kind of like a top build for Druid, but just know that you're not going to be like infinitely stacking your crit damage anymore. Now we get to the bug fixes. There are a lot here. There's a few important ones to point out. I'm not going to read through all of them. The first really important one is fix an issue where Primal Landslide's Terra modes would not be created by free cast of Landslide from the Trample Earth aspect if Landslide was not equipped. This is basically going to allow us to use Landslide builds without having Landslide on the hotbar. This is going to open up a whole new skill slot for any build that was using Landslide, Terravolt, Poison Slide. This is basically opening up a new skill to put into the build, because if you're not casting Landslide, you don't need to have it on your bar to benefit from the full damage of those Terra modes, which is really cool. I like that change a lot. Then we get to the real big one that we kind of all knew was coming, and that is fixed an issue where innate Earth and Bulwark scaled with target's health instead of the player's weapon. Now, Bulwark is still probably going to be used on a lot of builds. I just don't see it being used for damage. It's still going to be a good survivability tool and a tool that's going to give you some sources of unstoppable. However, I don't know if you're going to be using it for damage anymore. They are nerfing a lot of our damage, and they're also nerfing the way that Bulwark is going to be dealing damage. And so it's not going to be an ability that you can basically equip and walk into a Nightmare 100 dungeon and kill things. One, you're going to need way better gear, way better optimization to get anywhere near the damage. And then two, it's just not going to, it's a defensive skill. I just don't see it doing nearly as much damage. So I think Bulwark builds, from like my initial impressions of reading this, are probably dead. to be honest. I still think it's going to be a good defensive skill. I just don't know if you're going to be able to really squeeze out offensive damage from it. And lastly, we got one more thing. That was the Mad Wolf's Glee and Insatiable Fury now are fixed at +3 ranks. You're no longer going to be able to upgrade them to get that +4, which was pretty cool, but weird that it worked that way. So there's another bug fix there. Guys, that is going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Overall, I think the builds to play for Druid, if you played Druid last season and want to try something new that's still powerful, I think Poison Druid is going to be really strong this season. I think Lightning Druid's going to be in a great spot. Tornado's still going to be good. And I think Overpower Werebear might be awesome. Overpower Werebear's kind of been like this like build that you use up to like level 60, 65 and then stop using, to be honest. And that's going to be even stronger. Nature's Fury builds could be really neat. It's just, in my opinion, even though there are, like, on paper, we're going to be doing less damage, I think the builds are going to be a little bit more interesting to, like, see what's going to be the strongest and what's going to come out on top, as we really just don't know, especially when we combine that with the vampire powers. There's a lot of new synergies that could come out. But yeah, guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you plan on sticking with Druid, if you played last season, or if you're going to try out Druid this season if you haven't played it before. I will catch y'all in the next one, guys. Take care. Peace.